So today we're going to be talking about 8-7, solving trinomial equations. So this is our rule that we're going to follow every time we're solving equations. Your equation must equal 0 for you to be able to solve it. And we'll talk about why this is important later on. Let's first take a look at our first example. So we have an equation that we need to solve. X squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So this equation, as you can see, is already equal to 0, which means we can already just begin solving it. When we solve, we already know how to do the first step, which is just to factor the trinomial. So if you need to review any old videos on how to do this, I would suggest to watch those first. So the first thing that we're going to do when factoring is list out our a, b, and c values. A is 1, b is -4, and c is +3. Multiply a times c, so 1 times 3, and list out our factors. There's only a few factors of 3, and that's either 1 times 3 or -1 times -3. Both of these will equal +3. Now we need to take the sum of our factors. So we're going to add them together. We're going to add 1 plus 3 and -1 plus -3 to get our sums. Remember, our sum always needs to equal the b value. So in this case, b is -4. We listed this earlier. And so these are the factors that we would want to use. These correctly add up to -4. So I'm going to use these factors in our box over here. Remember, in our box, we put the two factors, -1x and -3x. And then the other two boxes come from the original equation. So in this box, we are going to write the first term, which is x squared, and then the last term, which is +3, is going to go in this box. Once we fill out our box, we just write the greatest common factor on the outside. So the greatest common factor between x squared and -3x is x. The greatest common factor between -1 and 3 is 1. And remember the rule, if the box next to it, so we're writing our factor out here, if the box next to your factor is negative, then you need to include a negative sign with your factor. Again, the factor between these two is x, and -3 and 3 have a common factor of 3. And remember, this has a negative sign, so our factor also needs a negative sign. Alright, so now that we are done solving, we are going to write our final answer out. This is our step 2. For step 2, we need to write our equation with the new factors. So x minus 1 and x minus 3. Remember, I just got this from the outside of the box. And when we're writing the equation, it's really important to make sure that it's equal to 0. So in the original problem, x squared minus 4x plus 3 was equal to 0. So we need to make sure our factors are equal to 0. This way we can solve it. So we write out our new equation with the factors, and then we just need to solve. I'm going to first show you how to solve, and then I'm going to explain why we can do this. So in order to solve, we set each factor equal to 0. So this first factor, x minus 1, is going to be equal to 0, and the other factor, x minus 3, is going to be equal to 0. And then we just solve for x. So remember, do the opposite operation. So if this is -1, we're going to add 1 to both sides so that we can solve for x. And same thing over here. If this is -3, then we're going to add 3 to both sides to solve for x. So x is going to be equal to 1, and x is equal to +3. So why did I do this step right here? How come I set each of these equal to 0? The reason why I set each of these equal to 0 is because we need to remember a fundamental rule when it comes to products. So remember that anything times 0 is going to equal 0. We know this as a rule. Any number times 0 equals 0. And so when we have an equation like this, where we have two things being multiplied by each other, and it equals 0, then we can assume that x minus 1 could be 0, it could equal 0, or x minus 3 could equal 0. So that is the reason why we set each of these to 0 and we can solve for x, because we know that anything times 0 is going to equal 0. So we just set each of these equal to, and these are our two solutions. So x is going to be equal to 1, and also x is equal to 3. We have two answers whenever we're solving these trinomials. So anytime you're solving a trinomial expression, keep in mind that you will almost always have two values for x that you are solving for. Alright, let's take a look at example 2 and try a slightly different type of. Here is example 2. We want to solve x squared plus 6x equals 7. So this problem is a little bit different than the last one because we don't have an equation equal to 0 already. So an important note to make here is that if your equation is not equal to 0 already, then you need to first make it equal to 0 and then you can factor it. So first make it 0 before factoring. So how do we make it 0? We can just add or subtract on both sides. So if I have x squared plus 6x equals 7, and I need this side to be 0, then I do the opposite. So if this is a positive 7, I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides. And this will leave me with x squared plus 6x minus 7 on the left side. And 7 minus 7 is 0. So now that I have my equation equal to 0, I can start with my first step, which is to factor. So I'm going to factor these really quickly. Go ahead and pause. Try to factor this on your own and see if you are able to do step 1 on your own. And then come back and resume the video. Okay, so if you factored it on your own, you should have gotten a value of 6, b value of 7, and c value of negative 7. Multiplying a times c, we get negative 7, and our factors are going to be 1 times negative 7 or negative 1 times positive 7. We do the sum of our factors, so adding these together. 1 plus negative 7 is going to give you negative 6. Negative 1 plus 7 is going to give you positive 6. Now our b value was positive 6, so we want these two numbers. We set up our box. Inside our box we have negative x and 7x. Our first term was x squared. Our last term was negative 7. And then we write our greatest common factors on the outside. So the GCF for these two boxes is going to be x. The greatest common factor between these two is negative 1. And we have another x out here and a positive 7. Because remember, if the number next to it is positive, your factor is going to be positive. I'm going to now rewrite my factored equation. So our factored equation is x minus 1. Our factored equation is x minus 1 times x plus 7 equal to 0. Now we just solve. Solve for x. Set each factor equal to 0. So x minus 1 is going to equal 0, and x plus 7 is going to equal 0. Now just add on both sides. So x is going to be positive 1. And for this one, since we have plus 7, do the opposite. So we minus 7 on both sides for this one. And x is going to equal negative 7. And these would be our solutions.